at mga iba pang na pangyari. At we're doing this para po hindi natin maisip basta-basta na ang Pilipinas ay ang mundo at ang mundo ay ang Pilipinas. We have to expand our appreciation of what's going on around the world because somewhere along the line you will feel that these events have an impact on our lives. It has an impact on our economy. It has an impact on culture in general. No? And this is very, very important. It's a kind of appreciation that not many in our countrymen today have. Kinakailangan po maintindihan natin. Kadalasan po ngayon, kung ano-anong pinag-awayan natin tungkol sa mga certain issues, no? Dito na lang sa sitwasyon, yung mga iba sabi nila, kampi ako sa China. Yung isa, kampi ako sa Amerika. Bakit po ganyan ang ating palaging iniisip? Ito yung tinatawag na geopolitical situation. Ba't hindi natin sabihin kampi tayo sa kapayapaan? Hindi lang sa Pilipino. Siyempre, nandun na po tayo, kampi tayo sa Pilipino. Pero kampi tayo sa kapayapaan. Kampi tayo sa sangkatauhan. We are for humanity. We are for peace, world peace. Why don't we say that? Why do we have to side with one country and say that this country can beat the other? As if though we were just observers, para po tayong nandun lang sa gymnasium at nanonood ng basketball game. Hindi natin nare-realize na pag nagsalungat itong mga superpowers na ito, patay din tayo. Hindi po ba? Especially with the kind of conflicts we have here. Well, bago natin buksan ang ating programa at talakayan, gusto ko lang po ilabas. Ako po kasama dito sa mga nagdadalamhati na isa pong matalik na kaibigan at rinirespetong tao ng Diyos, na si Archbishop Oscar Cruz ay pumanaw na. For the past 2-3 years, he has been sick and in and out of the hospital for some time. At maski na ilang beses nakita ko po siya mga 2-3 beses during this time. Pero palagi pong nalulungkot ako dahil pinipigilan pala siya na makipag-usap sa mga kanyang kaibigan at pinipigilan siya ni Soc Villegas dahil si Soc Villegas daw ang may control sa kanya habang may sakit siya. No? Dahil po si Soc Villegas ay obispo ng Archdiocese of Dagupan, no? At ay ang huling pwesto, official position ni Archbishop Oscar Cruz was in Pangasinan dito po sa Dagupan. So in process, siya na po ang may control noon at hanggang namatay po si Bishop Cruz, siya rin ang nagmando sa lahat. No? At any rate, malapit po yan si Bishop Oscar Cruz sa atin for many years. No? And when we started the state of the Save the Nation movement, advisor po natin si Oscar Cruz. When we put up the Solidarity for Sovereignty movement, advisor po si Oscar Cruz. When we discussed the benefits of and the importance of the restarting the Bataan nuclear power plant for the good of the country, sang-ayon po si Bishop Oscar Cruz. taliwas dito sa mga ibang mga obispo na mukhang ignorante tungkol sa benepisyo na ibibigay ng nuclear power plant. Si Oscar Cruz po nakita niya agad ang benepisyo may ibibigay ito para sa bansa natin. Hindi niya po iniisip yung politika kasi Marcos or Corazon Aquino. Siya po ay para sa taong bayan. So ang tinuturi ko po siyang hindi lang alagad ng Diyos, kundi isang tunay na patriotiko, si Bishop Oscar Cruz. Nung itinatag namin itong KDP, Katipunan ng Demokratikong Pilipino, and we launched it last year, was it last year? No, August of 2018 sa Kalayaan Hall ng Club Filipino. Siya po sana ay dadalo para magbigay ng invocation because siya po ang advisor or tawag namin spiritual director ng KDP. Sinamampalad po na masama po ang pakiramdam niya, ngunit sumulat siya ng kanyang pahayag at binigyan niya ako ng otoridad noon na basahin ko ang kanyang pahayag para doon sa okasyon ng paglulunsad ng Katipunan ng Demokratikong Pilipino. And I want to share with you this last document that Bishop Oscar Cruz has provided us. Na binasa ko po noon sa Kalayaan Hall ng Club Filipino in August 31, 2018. Ano bang petsa ngayon? August 30? 30. Okay. So halos anibersaryo ngayon. Okay, ganito po siya, and let me read it. Ang sabi po ni Bishop Oscar Cruz after greeting the audience, as I read his statement, he says, "There is an inversion of values that has of late overcome us. Time was when a father would tell his son that going to school was the greatest thing he could give to make him a better person than he ever was himself. Now the family is rent apart, and the son does not know who to follow. The paradigms of leadership in every sphere of our lives have shifted. Time was a white-suited clerk in government, was the most honorable and prideful undertaking a barrio boy could aspire to. Today, the entire government machinery appears to have features of a den of thieves. But it seems to me that there is a bright light emerging from all the darkness that is Philippine politics. There is a group of men and women that are striking a different tune in the chaotic noises in the body politic. It is a welcome echo of what we used to hear before politics became a dirty word. Things like principle before convenience and ideas instead of personalities. From my solitary vantage, it is a daring implementation of the Lord's instruction of His ministry. I did not come to be served, but to serve. It is with heartfelt joy that I congratulate the rising of a new political party of inspired and courageous Filipino patriots determined to address the issues which have long caused much suffering for our people. Finally, the Filipino people are given a true alternative to the same old politicians and their relatives who have made Congress their family businesses, an alternative to public cheaters and liars, an alternative to drug protector politicians, an alternative to hopelessness and despair. For the sake of our country and the Filipino people, I pray for the success of the Katipunan ng Demokratikong Pilipino. May God bless, may God always be with you. Signed, Archbishop Oscar V. Cruz, August 24, 2018.
Okay.
Yan po yung pahayag ni Archbishop Oscar Cruz nung pong nag-launch ang Katipunan ng Demokratikong Pilipino. At minarapat po namin basahin sa inyo. Ito po ang kahuli-hulihan niyang pahayag yata, no? At that time, dito sa ating sitwasyon. No? Dahil nagkasakit na po siya, na ospital, at napakahirap na pong makausap during that time. Hindi na siya po lumalabas nun sa publiko. So, Godspeed, Archbishop Oscar Cruz. We will miss you, but we pray for you, and please pray for us and our country. Okay. Okay, thank you for giving me the opportunity to say this in memory of our good friend Bishop Oscar Cruz. Okay, we can now shift to the topic for the evenings. Well, we don't have a real specific topic, but we were discussing things that have happened and are happening significantly outside the country. Ito pong mga ibang nangyayari dito, madalas na lang po ninyong naririnig dito sa ating himpilan, sa ating programa, tungkol dito kay President Duterte, sa confusion, at ito pong itinutulak natin palagi na importanteng basahin po ng mahal na Pangulo itong ating saligang batas. Bagamat marami pong infirmities na ayaw natin dito sa ating saligang batas, meron pong specific provision dito sa Article 12, sections, iba-ibang sections, verse 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, up to 22. No? Yan po ang mga importanteng provisions na nagbibigay ng paraan para sa ating Pangulo na gumawa ng kinakailangan ng ating bansa, kinakailangan ng ating mga mamamayan. It is telling the President that in these times of crisis, he has the power to declare a state of emergency and to take over the utilities, public utilities, from private hands, temporarily or permanently, depending on the conditions, and bring down all the electricity rates, water rates, and all of these costs that are severely overcoming the quality of life of the Filipino people. Ito po ang mga pinakamabigat na pasan ng mga mamamayan natin. At sinasabi dito, nakasaad po sa ating saligang batas. Gawin mo ito dahil kailangan po ng ating mamamayan. Up to now, wala pa tayo pong alam kung gagawin niya o hindi. But that is not the point of our discussion now. The point of our discussion now is understanding what is happening here. Let us look at what's happening outside, because for sure it will have an impact on our lives here in the Philippines. Hindi ba, Itas?
Right. Just to gusto ko lang i-emphasize yung sabi ni Chairman, yung tatay ko po, na about about yung saligang batas natin. Parang pinapakitaan na tayo ng ating konstitusyon mismo, our framers, and what path we must take. It's been there all the time. There's no need to invent new laws. There's no need to have charter change. There's no need to have revolutionary government. All you need to do, you have the Constitution that is your weapon to fight these things. So nandun na po. And the wisdom of our framers, sabi mo ng 1972, 35, the point is, any sovereign nation, republic, has that in its constitution because it must protect its own citizens. It must protect the general welfare of its own citizens. That's the very reason it exists. So nandun po lahat ng kailangan. Wala na kailangan legal, kesa legal. Nandyan na po lahat. At ang mga tao, ang mga legislators na mag-oppose niyan are in effect opposing the Constitution.
Yes.
So it's easy to
Not
push
only-
forward, di ba?
And the president, literally, actually, if you were to look at the Constitution, if he doesn't do what is needed to be done under the present circumstances, he will be considered as violating the Constitution. At sana wag tayo maabot sa ganyan. Pero yun po ang sitwasyon dito sa atin at sana po magawa niya ang kinakailangan gawin. No?
Yeah.
Now, ihambing naman natin ito sa ibang leader. For example, si President Trump. No? Ano ba ang ginagawa ni President Trump ngayon? Kasi alam niyo po, kung nakikita niyong malaki ang problema ni
President
Pangulong Duterte dito sa atin kasi may drugs, meron communist terrorism,
Corruption, lahat
meron
yan.
Muslim secessionist movement, meron lahat dito, may corruption, ang laki-laki ng corruption. Pati na yung kanyang sakit na kung ikukumpara mo ngayon sa kumakalaban kay President Trump, na siguro on the degree of 1:10, 1 tayo, 10 na siya. Ganyan po grabe yung problema. At hindi lang po yan, kasi yung pong mga gustong magtanggal kay Trump, no? Iba ang kanilang pamamaraan at iba ang kanilang intensyon. At ang ating pong kinakatakutan dahil po dito sa mga sinasabi nila, malaki po ang posibilidad na ang intensyon nila mag-umpisa ng isang malawakang gera pag silang nakaupo. At nakakatakot po. Si President Trump, ang kanya pong personality ay negosyante at ang gusto niya, magkakaroon siya ng mga trade agreements. Ay, alam niyo po, negosyante, magaling po yan sa negotiations pagdating sa ekonomiya. At dahil itong nagagawa niya na aayos niya ang sitwasyon ng Amerika sa ekonomiya at sa mga ibang bagay pa.
In the past week, just to yung nangyari nga last week sa US, ang pinakamalaking news is the Republican National Party had their convention. Additionally po, kasi para tayong dito mamimili yung Democrats ng kanilang standard bearer through a convention. Yung mga delegates po ng iba't ibang states, all the states of the US, pupunta sa isang lugar, tapos magsasalita sila, sasabihin nila, ito ang pinipili kong presidente. Lahat ng boto from, say, California, X amount of what they call electoral votes. Basta representative ng California, gusto namin si Trump. Representative ng New York, gusto namin si Trump. Kung may iba pang nasa Republican Party na gustong tumakbong bilang presidente, ngayon, laban din sila, may botohan. But right now, it's only Trump running for the Republican. And ang nangyari po, nakikita niyo po sa mga news siguro, sa YouTube at lahat, puro speeches.
Mm.
4 days, 5 days yan, preparation until sa huling day si Trump, tapos mag-accept siya. So yun yung pinakamalaking news. At maganda po yung mga speeches po ni Trump.
Mm.
Yung mga taong nagsalita si Trump, yung kanyang anak, si Ivanka, yung kanyang sige po.
Well, marami po siyang kasamahan na meron pong may madre pa nagsalita dyan. Catholic nun. Yung isang anak niya din, si Eric, napakaganda din ng speech ni Eric nung anak niya. No? At yung mga iba pa, pati po mga dating Democratic Party na lumipat sa Republican Party dahil dismayado sila sa Democratic Party dahil sabi niya, ni isang beses ayaw nilang banggitin ang pangalan ng Diyos. No? Ni isang beses, sabi niya. At ayaw nila yung maglalagay ng mga statements sa mga speeches na may
hambi or relation?
May relation o may direction ng Diyos.
Yes.
Imagine, ito na ang pag-iisip nitong mga ito. Walang Diyos. Sa kabila naman, si Trump, no? Andyan siya, pro-life, no? Ito kabila naman, gusto nila late-term abortion. 9 months na, pwede mo pang patayin ng bata sa loob ng sinapupunan ng nanay. No?
Gusto nila gawing batas yun.
Gagawin nilang batas yun. No? Si Hillary Clinton, yan ang itinutulak, yan ang pinapangako. No? Si Biden, yan din ang pinapangako. No? Dahil daw merong karapatan ng mga kababaihan na mag-decide sa kanilang buhay at yung bata, maski na 9 months na sa loob ng tiyan, no, ay pwede pang patayin. Dahil daw may karapatan yung nanay, gawin yon.
Yes.
Ito po ay ayaw na ayaw ni President Trump. No? Kasi siya po ay pro-life.
Yeah.
At sasabihin niya, pag ginawa ito ay magiging krimen.
Right. So, sa inyo po, again, maganda po, panoorin nyo kung may access po kayo sa YouTube. Kung may kayo, panoorin yung mga speeches na buong mga speeches. Kasi ang dami po nagsalita.
Meron ba tayong mapaparinig sa atin?
Not now. I can send so a little later. But I have other speeches.
Okay.
But yung maganda po, hanapin nyo po yung madre na nagsalita. Kasi dating Army corporal yata itong si sister. Colonel. Sister. But she's a Catholic nun.
Catholic nun.
Ang sabi niya po, yung Democrats ngayon daw, yung kandidato nila, si Joe Biden tsaka si Kamala Harris, ang pinaka-anti-life na candidate sa buong history ng United States daw. Tapos yung si Trump daw ang pinaka-pro-life na kandidato sa buong history ng United States. Kaya daw pinaka-importante to sa election natin. Sa election ng US in November. But again, gusto nga namin sabihin, no? Imagine po kung pro-life itong presidente na na-elect sa US. Imagine Trump as the president of the most powerful nation of the world. Ang dami niya pong gagawing iba. So, iba yung direction niya. Pag si Biden at si Kamala yung na-elect, iba yung direction nila. Sigurado po tayo dyan.
Ang laki ng impluensya yan sa buong mundo, no?
Not just the countries, but in the UN.
Right, all over. No? Malaki pong impluensya. Dito na lang sa birth control, tsaka sa pro-life, anti-life, no? Pag ang napanalo dyan itong mga sila Biden, no? Nasasabihin nila payag na sila na patayin yung bata up to 9 months, yung tinatawag na late term abortion, no? Ay siyempre itong mga ibang mga bansa, no? At itong mga ibang tao sa ibang bansa na yan din ang itutulak, yan din ang tutulak. Sasabihin nila ginagawa na sa Amerika, ba't masama naman? Ba't mamasamain nyo, no? So this is the influence that the United States has. And we have to understand it. Maski na hindi tayo botante sa Amerika, Titingnan po natin kung saan papunta ang bansang Amerika pagdating sa policies, sa programa, no? At yung intensyon ng leader ng bansang Amerika.
Yes.
No?
Importante po yun. Tapos, isa pa yung nabanggit maganda po yung isang speech yung anak niya, si Ivanka, na very smart, very intelligent, very pretty, of course, si Ivanka Trump. And ang sinabi niya po, si Trump, outsider po yun. Hindi po siya taga-Washington. Ibig sabihin, hindi siya politiko. Nanalo po siya. Kumbaga, under Republican Party po siya. Pero halos independent siya. Outsider kasi siya. Pati yung mga taong tumakbo against him within the Republican Party, ayaw po siya. Kasi nga gusto niyang palitan lahat. Gusto niyang baguhin ang sistema. Ang huling word dun sa speech ni Ivanka po, Washington did not change Trump. President Trump changed Washington. And sobra silang saya. Yun yung ano nila. Kasi sa tao daw sila. Sabi nila, wala siyang pakialam sa mga elitista. Kahit siya, mayaman siya. Wala siyang pakialam sa elitista. May ano siya sa tao. And sabi niya, parang ang sinabi ni Pinoy dati, kayo ang boss niya. Pero si Pinoy, sinungaling. Diba? Itong si Trump, sinabi po niya, parang kayo lang ang interesado kong tulungan, hindi yung mga elitista dito sa Washington, hindi yung mga elitista, mga oligarko sa mundo. Kaya galit na galit niya. Meron pang sinabi si Ivanka, sabi niya, binabaan ni Trump ang prescription medicine, ang cost, ang presyo ng gamot. Binabaan niya ng malaki. Tapos ang dami daw presidente ng CEO ng mga pharmaceutical companies tumatawag daw kay Trump, galit na galit. Tumatawa lang daw si Trump. Tapos sabi niya sa anak niya, siguro tama yung ginawa natin kasi galit na galit yung mga mga big pharma.
Nag-utos siya babain ang presyo ng mga gamot, di ba?
Yes.
Dito
Para sa mga tao.
Para sa mga tao. Dito sa Pilipinas, di natin magawa-gawa yun. No? Dahil takot na takot yata itong mga, yan sila Duque at kung sino-sino man, no? na labanan na itong mga big pharma.
Yeah.
O kaya, baka nakakatanggap sila ng malaking aumento sa mga Sanofi at iba-iba pang mga
malaking thank you.
Thank you. No?
Pero later on, we will also talk about yung DOH. No? Maybe, I think Roxanne has a clip. Okay ka ba? Sige, yung Sister Byrne. Maganda po ito.
Pakinggan nyo pa.
Good evening. I'm Sister Dee Dee Byrne, and I belong to the community of the Little Workers of the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary. Last 4th of July, I was honored to be one of the President's guests at his Salute to America celebration. I must confess that I recently prayed while in chapel, begging God to allow me to be a voice and instrument for human life. And now here I am, speaking at the Republican National Convention. I guess you better be careful for what you pray for. My journey to religious life was not a traditional route, if there is such a thing. In 1978, as a medical school student at Georgetown University, I joined the Army to help pay for my tuition and ended up devoting 29 years to the military, serving as a doctor and a surgeon in places like Afghanistan and Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. After much prayer and contemplation, I entered my religious order in 2002, working to serve the poor and the sick in Haiti, Sudan, Kenya, Iraq, and in Washington, D.C. Humility is at the foundation of our order, which makes it very difficult to talk about myself. But I can speak about my experience working for those fleeing war-torn and impoverished countries all around the world. Those refugees all share a common experience. They have been all marginalized, viewed as insignificant, powerless, and voiceless. And while we tend to think of the marginalized as living beyond our borders, the truth is the largest marginalized group in the world can be found here in the United States. They are the unborn. As Christians, we first met Jesus as a stirring embryo in the womb of an unwed mother and saw him born 9 months later in the poverty of the cave. It's no coincidence that Jesus stood up for what was just and was ultimately crucified because what he said wasn't politically correct or fashionable. As followers of Christ, we are called to stand up for life against the politically correct or fashionable of today. We must fight against a legislative agenda that supports and even celebrates destroying life in the womb. Keep in mind, the laws we create define how we see our humanity. And we must ask ourselves, what are we saying when we go into a womb and snuff out an innocent, powerless, voiceless life? As a physician, I can say without hesitation, life begins at conception. While what I have to say may be difficult for some to hear, I am saying it because I'm not just pro-life, I'm pro-eternal life, and I want all of us to end up in heaven together someday. Which brings me to why I'm here today. Donald Trump is the most pro-life president that this nation has ever had, defending life at all stages. His belief in the sanctity of life transcends politics. President Trump will stand up against Biden-Harris, who are the most anti-life presidential ticket ever, even supporting the horrors of late-term abortion and infanticide. Because of his courage and conviction, President Trump has earned the support of America's pro-life community. Moreover, he has a nationwide of religious standing behind him. You'll find us here with our weapon of choice, the rosary. So thank you, Mr. President. We are all praying for you.
Nakakaano.
Alam mo, tingnan niyo po yung sinabi ng madre, no? Simpleng-simple po, no? The most pro-life president ever in the history is Donald Trump, no? And the most anti-life presidential candidates, no? Is Biden and and Harris, yung kanyang babaeng kaano na. Because these people support not just late abortion, they support infanticide. No? Infanticide goes even after the birth. No? Ito po ang nature nitong mga taong ito. At ang sinasabi po, bagamat madre po siya, Catholic siyempre, and we're talking of moral values here. But she says, as a physician, as a doctor, she knows that life starts at the time of conception. Conception. Hindi pa po 1 weekend, doon pa lang pagsama ng babae at ng lalaki. Nung pagsama nun, may buhay na. Sabi ng doktor, sabi niya, not just because she's a nun, but because she's a physician. Now, it gives you an idea, again, of what kung ganyan ang isip ng mga gustong maging presidente sa ibang bansa, kung doon pa lang, yung bata pa lang, papayag na silang patayin, no? At saan mo, anong limits niyan? Kung they value life in that way, what are the limits in terms of valuing the life of their people or valuing the life of the people around the world? Ito po ang ating isipin. And those are the people that are going to influence the world, the thinking of many people around the world. At pag nandun po sila sa position of power, gagamitin po at gagamitin ng mga kalaban ng buhay. Gagamitin po sila ng mga anti-life. Ito mga population control advocates. Gagamitin po sila as an example para sundan natin. Yan po ang influence niyan. Di lang sa atin, tatandaan nyo, pati yung mga darating na henerasyon. This is the... Meron pang ibang nagsalita nun. Hindi ko alam kung makukuha natin yung mga ibang
Yeah,
clips.
actually we can if we can choose who. Who do you
Yeah,
want?
tingnan natin si Ivanka tsaka si Eric. Gusto ko po itong mga anak ni Donald Trump. No? Kasi po, ang kanila, siyempre may conviction. No? Pero napakaganda po ng kanilang mga sinasabi. No? And I have not heard children of presidential candidates in the previous conferences that were held in previous elections in the U.S. No? Speak so greatly about their father, no? And understanding what their father is facing. You can see that they know that their father, no, is doing something which may cost his life. They know it. Feel po ng mga anak. Hindi lang I'm just proud of my... Pero mararamdaman nyo po na alam nila na yung tatay nila gumagawa ng kabutihan. Hindi nila pipigilin. No? At sasama sila pagpapaunlad, hiwatig ng mensahe at ng gusto nilang ilabas para sa sangkatauhan, para sa Amerika, para sa mga mamayan na Amerikano at para sa sangkatauhan. Kami po, hindi kami bumoboto. Hindi tayo bumoboto sa Amerika. Pero bakit natin sinasang-ayunan yung gusto ni Trump? Kasi po doon sa mga sabi niya at kung ano man ang ginagawa niya. Bakit po hindi natin sinasang-ayunan si Biden? Kasi po doon sa mga sinasabi niya at mga sinasang-ayunan niya.
Yeah. Remember,
Hindi, baliwala naman po siguro ang opinion natin,
Yes,
di ba?
yes.
Kasi hindi naman tayo bumoboto doon, hindi naman, wala naman tayo sa Amerika para mangampanya. No? Pero we have to understand so that we know how to place ourselves in the future.
Remember, we have a couple of speeches also of Eric and Ivanka later.
Okay.
But just to emphasize to the point of Kabuch, no? Remember po, Trump has always said sa lahat ng speeches niya, and you can research this, advice ko rin po, kunin niyo po yung original speech, ha? Hindi yung pinapalabas sa mga CNN, MSNBC.
Maski Fox News, pero basta makikita niyo yung buo, basta nakabuuan po.
Kahit raw. Yan ang hanapin niyo po. Nandun po sa internet, sa PBS NewsHour, or you can search sa Google, sa YouTube po, Trump on regime change.
Right.
Trump on wars. Consistent po si Trump. Sabi niya, hindi na tayo magre-regime change. Hindi tayo mag-ano ng gera. We will cooperate with all countries. Okay? Now, that is the policy that he's putting forward. Marami pong ayaw ng ganyan. Marami pong gustong gera. Marami sa Democrat, marami sa Republican, marami mismo sa kabinete niya gusto ng gera. So just to emphasize his point, that Trump has been saying this. On the opposite, si Hillary, tsaka si Biden, tsaka si Obama, gusto gera. Wala silang sinasabing let's cooperate, walang ganunan. Ang gusto nila, sundan nyo kami. Else, napamura nga si Presidente Duterte kay Obama eh. Dahil nga dun eh. Right? So, I think we can show Ivanka. Okay, Ivanka first or Eric?
Okay.
You want Eric?
Anyway, whoever.
Sige, si Ivanka.
Good evening. Before I begin, I want to send a special message to everyone who's been affected by Hurricane Laura. Our hearts are with you. The President will continue to support you every step of the way. And just like Americans always do, the nation will come together to help you rebuild your homes, businesses, and communities stronger and more resilient than ever before. "4 years ago, I introduced to you a builder an entrepreneur, an outsider, and the people's nominee for President of the United States. Tonight, I stand before you as the proud daughter of the people's president. He is our commander-in-chief, champion of the American worker, defender of common sense, and our voice for the forgotten men and women of this country. He is our president and my father, Donald J. Trump. This evening, I want to tell you about the leader I know and the moments I wish every American could see. I want to tell you the story of a president who is fighting for you from dawn to midnight, when the cameras have left, the microphones are off, and the decisions really count. When Jared and I moved with our 3 young children to Washington, we didn't exactly know what we were in for, but our kids loved it from the start. My son, Joseph, promptly built Grandpa a Lego replica of the White House. The president still displays it on the mantle in the Oval Office right over there so that he can show world leaders, just so they know he has the greatest grandchildren on earth. I agree. Over the last 4 years, we've learned a lot. I've seen in Washington it's easy for politicians to survive if they silence their convictions and skip the hard fights. I couldn't believe so many politicians actually prefer to complain about a problem rather than fix it. I was shocked to see people leave major challenges unsolved so they can blame the other side, campaign on the same issue in the next election. But Donald Trump did not come to Washington to win praise from the Beltway elites. Donald Trump came to Washington for one reason, and one reason alone: to make America great again. My father has strong convictions. He knows what he believes, and he says what he thinks. Whether you agree with him or not, you always know where he stands. I recognize that my dad's communication style is not to everyone's taste, and I know that his tweets can feel a bit unfiltered. But the results speak for themselves. He is so unapologetic about his beliefs that he has caused me and countless Americans to take a hard look at our own convictions and ask ourselves, what do we stand for? What kind of America do we want to leave for our children? I am more certain than ever before we want a future where our kids can believe in American greatness. We want a society where every child can live in a safe community and go to a great school of their choice. We want a culture where differences of opinion and debate are encouraged, not canceled, where law enforcement is respected, where our country's rich diversity is celebrated, and where people of all backgrounds, races, genders, and creeds have the chance to achieve their God-given potential. This is the future my father is working to build each and every day. Building, after all, is what he's done his whole life. He has admired and befriended construction workers on countless job sites. But it has been a new and profound experience for him and for me to see these stoic machinists and steelworkers come to him with a tear in their eye and thank him for being the only person willing to go to the mat for them, for their jobs, for their families, and for their futures. To the hardworking men and women across America and here tonight, you are the reason my father fights with all of his heart and all of his might. You are the reason he ran for president in the first place, and you are the reason he is going to keep fighting for 4 more years. remember one evening in early February of 2018, we were in the Oval Office with my father's top economic advisors, and the president was pushing to keep the promise he made to renegotiate the bad trade deals that had gutted millions of middle-class jobs. Most of his advisors argued that the economy was so strong following our historic tax and regulatory cuts that it didn't make sense to risk rocking the boat. After the meeting, as I walked with my father back towards the residence, he said, "You know, the reason this has never been done before is because our leaders haven't had the guts. When the economy is good, they settle for good, and when things are bad, they don't have the will or ability, so they kick the can until it's someone else's problem." He was right. If my father didn't take on these fights, no one would. In the months that followed, President Trump refused to settle for a good deal. He wanted a great deal, and ultimately, that is exactly what we got. I remember each time he was updated on the progress of the new trade deal with Mexico and Canada, he would say, "Don't let down those dairy farmers I met in Wisconsin. I don't want them to like this deal. I want them to love it." Today, in the midst of this unprecedented global pandemic, it's more clear than ever that our president was absolutely correct to take on trade when he did and bring our jobs, our factories, and our life-saving medicines back to the USA. As our nation endures this grave trial, I pray for the families who are mourning the loss of a loved one, for those who are battling COVID-19, and for the first responders and the healthcare heroes who remain on the front line of this fight. The grief, sorrow, and anxiety during this time is felt by all. I've been with my father, and I've seen the pain in his eyes when he receives updates on the lives that have been stolen by this plague. I have witnessed him make some of the most difficult decisions of his life. I sat with him in the Oval Office as he stopped travel to Europe. I watched him take the strongest, most inclusive economy in a lifetime, the lowest unemployment in a half century, and the highest wage increase for working families in decades, and close it down to save American lives. It is why our president rapidly mobilized the full force of government and the private sector to produce ventilators within weeks, to build the most robust testing system in the world, and to develop safe and effective treatments, and very, very soon a vaccine. My father isn't deterred by defeatist thinkers. The word impossible, well, it only motivates him. Donald Trump rejects the cynical notion that this country's greatest achievements are behind us. He believes that nothing is beyond our reach and that the best is yet to come. I have seen all of my life how my dad believes in the potential of each individual. Earlier this evening, we were all inspired by the incredible testimony of Alice Johnson, a great-grandmother who was sentenced to life in prison for a first-time nonviolent drug offense. I was with my father when he decided to commute Alice's life sentence. Together, we watched Alice leave prison after nearly 22 years. As she ran into the arms of her family and they celebrated a joyful reunion, my father got very quiet. I could see the emotion on his face. After a long silence, he looked at me and said, "Imagine how many people there are just like Alice." From that point on, he became a voice for those who had been unfairly silenced in our prison system. President Trump rectified the disparities of the 1994 Biden crime bill that disproportionately hurt African Americans. Against all odds, he brought together Republicans and Democrats and passed the most significant criminal justice reform of our generation, and we're just getting started. My father did not campaign on this issue. He tackled this injustice because he has a deep compassion for those who have been treated unfairly. More than rhetoric and political prose, the ability to build consensus and achieve bipartisan success will help heal our country's racial inequities and bring us forward together. President Trump is advancing the American values of work and family. 4 years ago in Cleveland, I said President Trump would deliver for working women. Last year, over 70% of all new jobs were secured by women. Four years ago, I told you my father would focus on making childcare affordable and accessible. In President Trump's first term, we secured the largest ever increase for childcare funding, giving more than 800,000 low-income families great childcare at a cost they can afford. As part of Republican tax cuts, in 2019 alone, our child tax credit put over $2,000 into the pockets of 40 million American families. Democrat politicians recently introduced a plan to increase the child tax credit. Yet when I was fighting less than 3 years ago at the president's direction to get Congress to double the child tax credit, not a single Democrat voted to pass the law. We got it done anyway. Four years ago, I promised that President Trump would support mothers in the workforce. In his first year in office, he signed into law the first ever national paid leave tax credit. Today, 8 million more Americans have access to this benefit. 4 years ago, I said that Americans needed an economy that permits people to rise again. During President Trump's first 3 years in office, 72% of all new jobs went to Americans who had been outside of the workforce. 4 years ago, I told you I would fight alongside my father, and 4 years later, here I am. Many of the issues my father has championed are not historically Republican priorities. Yet where Washington chooses sides, our president chooses common sense. Where politicians choose party, our president chooses people. Since the day he took the oath of office, I've watched my father take on the failed policies of the past and do what no leader has done before. Recently, he took dramatic action to cut the cost of prescription drugs, despite fielding angry calls from the CEOs of nearly every major pharmaceutical company. Now, when we see attack ads paid for by Big Pharma, my dad smiles and says to me, "You know, we're doing something really right if they're hitting us so hard." This spring, our president saw that American crops were going to waste because food supply chains were disrupted by the virus. He directed Secretary Perdue and me to find a way to get this nutritious food, fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, and dairy, to families most in need. Within a matter of days, we launched the Farmers to Family Food Box program, which has now delivered over 100 million meals into the hands of American families. To protect the most vulnerable among us, I've worked alongside the president as he signed into law 9 pieces of legislation to combat the evil of human trafficking. I've stood by my father's side at Dover Air Force Base as he's received our fallen heroes, and each time it has steeled his resolve to finally stop the endless foreign wars. To change the paradigm in the Middle East, he took a fresh approach. I heard foreign leaders beg him not to move the American embassy to Jerusalem, yet he delivered on a promise also made and unfulfilled by past presidents because my father knew that it was the right thing to do. Defying all expectations, Just weeks ago, he rewrote history again by making a peace agreement in the Middle East, the biggest breakthrough in a quarter century. For the first time in a long time, we have a president who has called out Washington's hypocrisy, and they hate him for it. Dad, people attack you for being unconventional, but I love you for being real, and I respect you for being effective. Our president refuses to surrender his beliefs to score point with the political elite. To my father, you are the elite. You are the only people he cares about scoring points with. If these problems were easy to solve, previous presidents would have done so. But you don't achieve different results by doing things the same way. Washington has not changed Donald Trump. Donald Trump has changed Washington.
You want to comment on
Well,
Ivanka?
yan po yung anak ni President Trump. Napakaganda po niya. At sabi ko kay Itos, kalma ka lang, may asawa na yan.
Tatlo na yata yung anak niya.
Tatlo na anak niyan.
Very smart also.
Very, very smart, very pretty like her mother. No? At you can see, yung katong kanyang salita ay makikita niyo po kung paano niyang ina-admire yung tatay niya. Hindi lang yun, naiintindihan niya exactly kung ano yung ginagawa at ang kabutihan na ginagawa ng ama niya dito sa ating sa kanilang bansa. And you have to admire it because many children of leaders of countries, at the time that their parents or father is the president or leader of the nation, you rarely hear them come out with that kind of a conviction and delivery of speeches like that, with intelligence and understanding. Her speech, she's the daughter. She's not, I don't think she's in any official position in government. But you can see that she understands the problems of the United States. And she carries with her even the pains of her father as he tries to solve the problems of the United States. He says, when the cameras are out and the microphones are off, he still continues to go on working, trying to come up with ideas to try to solve the problems of the country. Ayoko na lang sabihin dito sa ating sitwasyon dito. Kung naririnig natin ang mga anak na nagsasalitang ganito tungkol sa kanilang ama, na kompleto in a comprehensive situation, in a comprehensive delivery and understanding of the problems of state. I don't want to mention names, but try to use your imagination. This president, well, the previous president didn't have any children. Mukhang may problema siya sa pag-iisip, kanya walang gustong makipag-asawa sa kanya. Si Noynoy. Pero before him, and even before, and all the way up to Corazon Aquino, all the way up to Marcos, wala pa po ako nakarinig ng ganyang klaseng conviction of the children. if at all nakakalungkot, kung minsan they are apologists. Apologies for their parents. These types of people don't, they're not going to apologize. Not going to apologize for their father. No? Maski na yung sinasabi niyang meron siyang sariling style. Yung papa ko, sabi niya, he has his own style of communicating. Di ba? Narinig mo yan. No? Alam na natin yan. No? Pero hindi mo maki-question yung kanyang pag-iisip
Sa resulta.
at ang resulta nung kanyang ginasabi at ginagawa. No? That's what she says.
Tsaka lahat ng just to emphasize your point, na panood po kasi namin sabay. Tapos nakita namin na yung pamilya niya is working with him.
Yes.
They're part of the close-in team, working with different people within the Trump organization, no? Pero magkasama silang lahat. And sabi niya po ng tatay ko, sabi ni chairman, pag siya po nagbigyan ng opportunity, ang gusto niyang malapit sa kanya yung pamilya niya. Because trust daw niya, lahat ng to, they trust you, I trust them, they trust you.
Right.
And so they have, kumbaga sila yung pinaka matalik mong how do you say it?
Well,
they will defend you.
The most trusted people that are around you
Yes.
will have to be your family and your children.
Yes.
Hindi po ba? No? At hindi mo pwedeng alisin naman yan sa isang leader. No? Sa kasalukuyan na gobyerno po natin, kung ang most trusted advisors ng ating Pangulo ay si Sunny Dominguez at si Cusi, isama mo na rin pati si Bongo kung ang most trusted advisors niya at tutulong sa kanya ay ito. May problema po tayo. May problema po tayo. Kasi hindi mo maaalis sa kanilang pag-iisip yung kanilang sariling kapakanan. Sarili nila. Hindi mo mailalagay, masasabi sa atin, na kung ang puso ng presidente ay nasa kapakanan ng mamamayang Pilipino, nasa buhay nila, gusto niyang magsalba ng buhay, kung ganyan po ang nasa puso ng ating Pangulo, hindi mo po ma-convince na sarili mo na itong advisors niya ay ganyan rin. They are fending for themselves. They don't have the kind of commitment that the president makes to the people. No? They have not promised anything, but they are yet the closest advisors to the president. We have a problem. On the other hand, etong mga anak ng Pangulo, obviously, anak niya, mahal niya. Sa palagay niyo ba, ngayon, tumutulong sila sa governance? Tumutulong ba sila sa protekta ng Pangulo laban dito sa mga tiwaling miyembro ng kabinete niya? Ang puso ba nitong mga anak ni President Duterte? Tinatanong ko lang po, so nasa inyo na po ang sagot. Ang puso ba nila para sa mamamayang Pilipino ay pareho ng puso ng mahal na presidente sa mamamayang Pilipino? Ask yourselves. I'm not asking for any answer now. No. But this is the reason why we have to be very discerning tungkol dito sa sitwasyon natin. Habang nakikita natin sa ibang bansa at itong ehemplong pinapalabas natin, Unang-una, itong anak niya. Meron pa siyang ibang anak na nagsalita at makikita niyo pong sinasabi ko. Hanapin niyo din po sa YouTube yung kay Eric. Pangalan niya Eric Trump. At meron ba tayong clip nun?
Sumayin, Eric. He likes it.
Sige, gusto ko si Eric. Napaka forceful ng kanyang salita. Ito po yung isang, ano bang number si Eric? Panganay ba yan?
Hindi, tatlo yata.
Pangatlo?
I think.
At gusto ko lang bigyan ng example ito sa atin. That every time you're watching this po, you watch it as to what's happening in the US, but at the same time, hindi nyo iniiwan yung sa atin dito. Anong klaseng liderato ang kakailanganin natin para gawin ang kinakailangan gawin? Maski na maraming bumabara sa kanya. Ano po wag sinabi niya kanina ni Ivanka, hindi po pagpipili ng partido ang importante. Ang dapat malaman po ng taong bayan sa Amerika, ang pinili po ng presidente ay ang tao. No? He chose the people, sabi niya. Iyan ba masasabi natin diretso? No? Na the president that we have chooses the people. At ang people po yung kapakanan ng taong bayan. How does he what is this? What is the manifestation, the proof of this?
Yes.
Isa sa ginawa niya, pinababaan niya ang halaga ng gamot. In-order niya, babain mo ang halaga ng gamot para sa tao. Masyadong mahal yan. At nahihirapan na sila. Leader ba yan o hindi? Kinalaban siya ng buong pharma industry.
Mga oligarchy.
Mga oligarko.
Yeah.
Leader ba yan o hindi? Pakinggan po natin itong anak niya na si Eric Trump.
Good evening, America. When I stood on this convention stage 4 years ago, no one fully understood the historic change that was about to take place. We could all feel it. Something was happening. A movement was forming just below the surface. The forgotten man and woman, voiceless in Washington, D.C., were preparing to rise up. Our movement followed the pattern of so many that came before us. First, we were ignored. Then we were laughed at. Then they fought us. And then, together, we won. From that moment forward, America came first. America started winning again. America became respected again. But with every movement, there's a counter-movement. In the view of the radical Democrats, America is the source of the world's problems. As a result, they believe the only path forward is to erase history and forget the past. They want to destroy the monuments of our forefathers. They want to disrespect our flag, burn the stars and stripes that represent patriotism and the American dream. They want to disrespect our national anthem by taking a knee while our armed forces lay down their lives every day to protect our freedom. They do not want the Pledge of Allegiance in our schools. Many of them don't want one nation under God. The Democrats want to defund and disrespect our law enforcement. The Democrats want an America where your thoughts and opinions are censored when they do not align with their own. President Reagan said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It must be fought for, and it must be protected. This is the fight that we are in right now, and it is a fight that only my father can win. My father ran not because he needed the job, but because he knew hardworking people across this great country were being left behind. The media mocked these patriots in the flyover states in which they lived. They ignored the Trump flags. They ignored the millions of MAGA banners and barns painted in red, white, and blue. The silent majority had no one fighting for them in either party. Their so-called leaders were bowing to China, bribing Iran, and spending more time worrying about how they'd be received by the elites in Paris than how Americans would provide for their families in Pittsburgh. Our family lost friends, but it only pushed us to fight harder. My father pledged to every American in every city, state, and town that he was going to make America great again. And so began the Great American Comeback. Almost immediately, taxes were slashed, regulations were cut, and the economy soared to new heights, heights never seen before. Wages went through the roof. Unemployment reached historic lows, especially for Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, and women. Trade deals were ripped up and renegotiated. Lights were turned back on in abandoned factories across our country. Trillions of dollars were repatriated back to the United States, which had been sitting in foreign lands for far too long. Once again, America became the envy of the world. And with that renewed strength came leverage. The president demanded that our allies pay their fair share for the defense of the Western world. My father rebuilt the mighty American military, adding new jets, aircraft carriers. He increased wages for our incredible men and women in uniform. He expanded our military defense budget to $721 billion per year. America was no longer weak in the eye of the enemy. The moment President Trump ordered special forces to kill some of the deadliest terrorists on the planet, the day the mighty Moab was dropped on insurgent camps, is the day America took a stance to never be defeated by the enemy. Al-Baghdadi, Soleimani, dead. Over and over, issue after issue, the economy, the wall, the military, trade deals, tax cuts, Supreme Court justices, VA hospitals, prescription drugs, school choice, right to try, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, peace in the Middle East. Never-ending wars were finally ended. Promises made and promises for the first time were kept. Most politicians spend their entire careers in Washington, D.C. and get absolutely nothing accomplished. For example, Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a politician who has been in government for 47 years. He's a career politician who's never signed the front of a check and does not know the slightest thing about the American worker or the American business, the engine which fuels the greatest economy the world has ever known. The same politician who has been a total pushover for communist China, and someone who would be a giant relief for terrorists who now have spent years running, hiding, and being taken out by the most talented military known to man. Joe Biden has pledged to raise your taxes by $4 trillion. 82% of Americans will see their taxes go up significantly. Biden has pledged to stop border wall construction and give amnesty and health care to all illegal immigrants. Biden has pledged to defund the police and take away your cherished Second Amendment. My father, on the other hand, delivered the largest tax cuts in American history, knows if you do not have a border, you do not have a country, and will always support law enforcement and your right to keep and bear arms. Every day, my father fights for the American people, the forgotten man and woman of this country, the ones who embody the American spirit, which is unlike anything else in the world. It built the New York City skyline. It built the Hoover Dam. And soon, under my father's leadership, it will send Americans to Mars. The American spirit can be felt in the majesty of the Grand Canyon, the shadows of Mount Rushmore, and the stillness of the air at Gettysburg. It can be seen in the wide-eyed wonder of every American child as they take their first breath in the greatest country the world has ever known. It defeated fascism, it defeated communism, and in 68 days, it will defeat the empty, oppressive, and radical views of the extreme left. Ronald Reagan's quote ends with this simple warning. One day we could spend our sunset years telling our children what it was once like in the United States where men and women were free. Under President Trump, freedom will never be a thing of the past. That's what a vote for Donald Trump represents. It's a vote for the American spirit, the American dream, and for the American flag. To the law enforcement officer who's being attacked, betrayed, and whose job they are trying to make extinct, my father will fight for you. To all houses of worship and to all people of faith stripped of our religious freedoms and religious liberties, my father will fight for you. To the voiceless, shamed, censored, and canceled, my father will fight for you. To our farmers who work dawn to dusk to keep our plates full, my Father will fight for you. To every single mother and father, to our veterans, our coal miners, and to the American worker, my Father will fight for you. And to every proud American who bleeds red, white, and blue, my Father will continue to fight for you. In closing, I'd like to speak directly to my father. I miss working alongside you every single day, but I'm damn proud to be on the front lines of this fight. I'm proud of what you're doing for this country. I'm proud to show my children what their grandfather is fighting for. I'm proud to watch you give them hell. Never stop. Continue to be unapologetic. Keep fighting for what is right. You are making America strong again. You are making America safe again. You are making America proud again. And yes, together with a forgotten man and woman who are finally forgotten no more, you are making America great again. Dad, let's make Uncle Robert very proud this week. Let's go get another 4 years. I love you very much. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
Okay. Kita niyo ba, yun po yung anak niya. I think he's the third child of Donald Trump. And I'm sure you could feel the sincerity and the conviction of the son for what the father is doing for the country. No? At yan pong mga anak niya, wala po akong alam na may planong maging congressman o planong maging politiko sa darating na halalan. I don't think there is any of them. It is not their plan to take advantage of their father's political position. No? But they are working very closely with him to do what is needed for the United States, and actually, if I may say so, for the rest of the world. Yan pong ilinabas niya, hindi po yung I am pro-America. In that political sense. But I am pro-leaders that are going to do good for all of humanity. And we cannot help but consider that the United States is still the biggest and most powerful country in the world. Anything that happens to it will affect the rest of the world. And I hope that God will bless this man, Donald Trump, as he does bless the rest of the world, to bring us away from a world war, towards development. Yan po ang the reason we are presenting this.
I wanted to add lang. Remember po, again, I go back to the speeches. I go back to the past 3.5 years po ni Donald Trump. At ano pang sinasabi niya sa mga speech niya sa United Nations, sa World Bank, even sa US po. Remember, there was one address in the UN, or I think it was the World Economic Forum, o one of those conferences. Ang sinabi niya po ito, and you can research this. The future does not belong to the globalists. Sabi ni Trump. The future belongs to sovereign nations, to patriots. As I make America great again, I want China to make China great again. I want other countries to make their nations great again. Yan po si Donald Trump. Hindi niya sinasabi, papalakasan ko yung Amerika para mag-invade kami ng lahat ng bansa sa mundo.
At the expense of other nations.
Yes. So he is against globalization. Yan po ang kalaban niya. Yan po ang sila Soros. Yan po ang sila Democratic Party. Yan ang oligarko.
Yung globalization po, pareho po yan ng one world government.
Yes.
Okay?
Yan
Na ang
malapit.
direksyon na itinutulak nitong tinatawag natin deep state na kasama ginagamit itong politikang ito at ng Democrat parties, ng Democrat parties para tanggalin ang hadlang sa one world government ay walang iba kundi si Donald Trump. Ano po ang ginagawa nila sa paghahadlang? Marami po. Pero gusto namin pakita sa inyo isa sa mga bahagi ng ginagawa na. Tandaan niyo po, nung pagpasok si Donald Trump, sinabi, nandaya siya at tinulungan siya ng mga Russians. Naha. Nung hindi pa umubra yun, nag-impeachment sila para matanggal na naman si Donald Trump at masiraan.
May corruption daw sa Ukraine.
May corruption sa Ukraine, tinasabi sa kanya. Hindi umubra. No? Tapos dating na ngayon sa kampanya, ano pang nangyari? Para bagang gumagawa sila ng paraan para lalong sumadsad ang ekonomiya ng bansang Amerika para ibintang nila kay Donald Trump. Ang nagagawa naman ni Donald Trump ngayon ay nabibigyan niya ng trabaho ang mga iba-ibang industriya ng bansang Amerika. In just how long he has been able to generate 9 million jobs
3.5 years.
in 3.5 years. No? That is unprecedented. Pag sinasabi po namin to, hindi po ito bola. Dito po sa atin maraming mambobola. Kaya pagdating sa mga datos tsaka statistika, napakahirap pong paniwalaan. Kasi mga sinungaling kasi. Tingnan nyo na lang yung mga DOH, yan sila Duque. Tingnan nyo din sa sa NEDA at ano yan, paraging wala tayong maaasahan yan. Pero sa Amerika, nakabantay lahat ng mga ahensya kung ano ang datos na ilalabas.
Ano yung totoo?
Walang nagko-question doon sa sinasabi. Yung sinabi nung anak ni Trump na yung mga tao biglang nagkaroon ng trabaho, yung sa Ohio ba yun? No? Na dati patay lahat ng ilaw ng mga businesses. Ngayon bukas na naman, tsaka factories. No? Totoo po yun. Mga iba namin nakikilala, nagugulat nga sila. Nangangailangan pa daw ng mga trabahador. No? Sa Amerika dahil bumaandar na po yung kanilang mga negosyo at mga factories.
Sana all. Sana all. Diba, Roxanne? Sana all.
buong
Sana
mundo.
dito rin.
Dito din dapat,
Kaya
hindi
naman
po ba?
natin gawin.
Kaya natin gawin yan. No? Pero lang, hindi gagawin nitong mga advisors ng presidente. At ang presidente nakikinig sa advisors niya.
Alam mo bakit? Bakit kaya? They are globalists.
Yes.
These economic advisors.
Kasama yan sa one world government.
Kasama yan sa globalist na kinakalaban ni Trump.
Right.
So they're all of that mindset.
Right.
Kaya
Okay.
itong COVID nanghiram from the World Bank, di ba? Ilang bilyon. So but that's what they are. So one of the things that they wanted to do, one of the things is they came up backed by George Soros. Ilang linggo na natin din i-discuss to and we've talked about this many times. Yung Antifa po.
Antifa.
Antifa.
Anong ibig sabihin ng Antifa?
Anti-fascist daw.
Kunwari, anti-fascist sila.
Ito.
Pero sila ang tunay na fascista. Kasi ang gumagawa ng gulo, no? Para magkasira-sira ang mga negosyo at magkaroon ng parang social unrest.
So
They're doing this on purpose.
Yeah. So para tong armed component ng mga kaliwa. Okay? So this is funded. Alam na natin yung ilang beses na natin. We won't go into that here now. But we've established that this is funded by George Soros himself, na who is the primary backer of the Democratic Party.
Right.
In fact, one of their components lumitaw itong grupong tinatawag na Black Lives Matter. Diba? BLM.
Ginagawa nilang racist issue para yung mga itim magsasama-sama at guguluhin ang mga negosyo at ang mga ang sektor ng mga yung society para huminto at ma-paralyze ang economic activity.
Right.
No? Tapos, dahil sa frenzy, yung paggagamit nila ng, you see, yung mga ibang tao, na lumalakas ang loob, gustong sugurin na ngayon yung mga bahay at mga negosyo ng mga ibang tao. Kasi ang may-ari dyan itim o puti, basta papasukan nila yan at gusto nilang kunin. No?
Okay. Paano natin alam na ito yung intention nila? Baka naman nagre-react lang sila kasi siyempre, lumataas yung mga tensyon, nagbabarilan sa US, sabi nila yung mga puti, pinapatay yung mga Black, African Americans. So ito ginagamit ngayon nila pangsabi sa mga Black from underprivileged neighborhoods. Poor. Ito yung mga walang trabaho, ito yung mga So sinasabi nila, pinapatay tayo ng puti, dapat mag-revolusyon tayo.
Yung mainstream media, inuudyukan.
Yes.
No?
Ngayon, yung network na yon nakasama si Soros, na bayad, yung ating mainstream media, CNN, MSNBC, kasama yan sa pag-increase ng tension, ng increase ng gulo. Iniudyukan nila parang, gawin niyo to. Tamo, itong puti, pinatay yung itim mo, gano'n.
Tandaan niyo yan, ha? Ang pinapapakita nila na si Donald Trump walang kakayanan mag-ayos ng ng taong bayan, ng ekonomiya ng taong bayan, at hindi siya epektibo na leader para ibintang sa kanya itong mga ginagawa nilang kaguluhan.
Right.
No?
So, pag nakita nyo, pwede nyo po i-research sino ba mga leader ng Black Lives Matter sa iba't ibang city. Pag in-interview po sila, napakamilitante. Ang sasabihin nila, yung objective po nila ay sila daw kailangan burahin yung history ng Amerika. Kailangan bago na. Kasi 400 years of oppression daw sa kanila. Sa kanilang race, which is the African American, the Black. So kailangan patayin lahat ng puti, tanggalin yung gobyerno, baguhin yung Amerika. Yan po ang gusto nilang mangyari. Yan ang ginagawa nila.
So sirain nila talaga ang struktura ng gobyerno.
Yes.
Yun ang gusto nila. At dito sila inuudyukan, no? Para mapuwersa nga si Trump na gumamit ng dahas at hindi siya at maraming mamatay. Gusto nila yung mga may namamatay no? Para maibintang sa kanyang politika.
Right. So this is not the first time that race was used to create chaos sa US po. In the 1960s po, the time of segregation, na sinasabi ng segregation, yung mga taga-deep state, the same structure, the same people, the same oligarchy and finance and these people, bankers, they wanted to create tension also. They've been trying to create tension, black and white. Hindi tayo magkakasama, ibang kultura natin, magkalaban tayo, kahit lahat kayo Amerikano.
Right.
Okay? So they tried to do this with riots also around the country during the 68, mga 1965 to 68.
Yeah.
During this time, may lumabas na isang leader. During that time, ang pangalan po niya Martin Luther King.
Okay. Gusto ko lang anuhin.
Sige.
Bago po natin ilabas itong kay Martin Luther King, gusto namin pakita sa inyo kung ano ang mga riots at nangyayari sa bansang Amerika ngayon na ginagamit nila para ibintang sa liderato. Meron na ba tayong ready?
Wala tayong wala tayong of the riots.
Wala. Anong meron tayo?
We have Martin Luther
Okay.
King.
Sige, Itos. Kala ko meron tayong clips dyan. Yung sinasabi ni Itos napakahalaga. No? When race was used, at kasi po dati sa bansang Amerika, mas grabe pa yung dati, tandaan nyo, meron silang segregation. No? Ang mga itim, hindi pwedeng pumasok sa restaurant na pamputi. Ang mga itim, hindi pwedeng gumamit ng mga comfort room, no? Na hindi para sa kanila. sa labas sila kailangan maghanap sa kalye o kaya hindi nila basta pwede.
Mas grabe yung
Mas
dati.
grabe. Yung sa bus,
Mm.
sa bus, kung sasakay sila,
Mm.
kailangan dun lang sila sa likod, hindi
Yeah.
pwede sa harap.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
At marami pang ibang mga maano sa laban sa itim. At siyempre, aangal. At
Mm.
ginamit nila ito
Mm.
para magkaroon ng parang revolusyon at lahat ng kaguluhan. Buti na lang ang unang presidente noon na magaling na hindi tawag dito, hindi racist,
Mm.
no? As a matter of fact, ano siya, very ano siya sa mga tao, no? Pero puti siya, si John F. Kennedy, no?
Mm.
Pero sa Mampalad, yung mga deep state, pinatay siya
Mm.
noong 1963.
Mm.
So etong 1963 hanggang
68.
1968, eto po hanggang 1970, yan up to 68, 30 importanteng tao ang pinatay namatay sa Amerika.
Mm.
Unang-una po si John F. Kennedy in 1963. Tapos po si Martin Luther King. At kakwento ni Itos kung sino to si Martin Luther King. No? Pagkatapos po ni Martin Luther King, pinatay naman si Robert Kennedy. No? Yung kapatid ni John F. Kennedy. In threes. Ang pumatay po dito, pare-pareho pong pag-iisip. Galing po sa parehong mga
Network
na operations. Yung pong ganyan po, yung nangyari noong 68, ganyan din po ang nagpapatakbo ngayon nitong mga riots. Ang ganyan ang pag-iisip pa rin.
Yes.
Mga iba namatay na sa kanila, pero yung ganyan pa rin ang pag-iisip. Pero mas grabe ang intention nito ngayon. Ang gusto nila talagang sirain, hindi lang yung buong Amerika, kundi ang mundo. Sila ang uupo as a one world government. Yeah. Kwento mo nga si Martin
So
Luther
there's
King.
so pwede namang sa internet, no, sa Wikipedia who he was, but he was a Baptist minister. He was a Christian, no, and he advocated po. Nakikita niya segregation kasi lumalala na yung yung segregation and racism dyan sa tinatawag na South. Yung South po, kung maalala po natin sa American Civil War, ito yung mga southern states na gusto pa rin ng slavery. Tapos si Abraham Lincoln, sabi niya, bawal na yung slavery. So nag-away sila, Civil War, nanalo yung tinatawag na union. So Martin Luther King was from Alabama, I think. Alabama. And Southern, para siyang Baptist minister.
Diba, Kansas.
I'm not sure. But
Memphis,
Tennessee.
Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay. So, and then he was meron siyang gift ng para siyang, kasi minister po siya, preacher po siya. Meron siyang gift sa oratory. Magaling po magsalita. Pero ini-advocate po niya ay non-violence. Ang ina-advocate po niya ay hindi yung white versus black, black versus white. Hindi dapat manaing yung isa over there. Ang ina-advocate po niya, equality. Ang hinihingi lang po niya, equal ang trato, equal opportunity for all American citizens. The same thing John F. Kennedy asked for, the same thing Franklin Roosevelt asked for, the same thing Abraham Lincoln asked for. Wala silang sinasabi ng mas magaling. So, ang alam ni Martin Luther King to, very steeped in world history yan si Martin Luther King. And he was always doing it, sabi niya, kung magpo-protest po tayo, pag Kristiyano siya, pag you're slapped, di ba? Pag sinampal po tayo,
Turn the other cheek.
sige, you turn the other cheek, huwag kayong gumante. Ganun po ang trato. So he had a huge following.
1 million man march.
Yeah, he had a huge following building up. And he was advocating sa Washington. Napaka-popular. Naging celebrity po siya because of his thinking and his philosophy and his advocacy for peace. Ayaw niya ng gulo. And he was working with JFK early on and then later on with Robert Kennedy at the time. Na kailangan isolve to. Ang kalaban nila ngayon, yan yung mga tinatawag na deep state. Yan yung mga sinasabing riots. Yan yung mga... So sinasabi nila, alam mo, maraming nangyayari in the US at the time. Sabi nga ni Kabuch, hindi kayo pwede sa isang banyo sa restaurant. May black pang African American tapos may pang puti. Tapos yung African American hindi pwedeng kumain sa ibang mga restaurant. Only certain restaurant.
Maski eskwelahan.
Sa eskwelahan may all black tapos may one of the big events there was JFK na punersa niya na pwede mag-aral ang isang black students sa a white college.
Right.
Nagka-confrontation pa nga yun eh. Ayaw payagan. Tapos pinadala niya yung National Guard. Papasukin niyo yung estudyante niya.
Binantayan siya ng gwardiya.
Yung mismong governor of the state, tumayo sa harap ng estudyante, hindi ka papapasukin dito. Tapos sabi ni Kennedy, papasukin mo yan, John F. Kennedy. Ganun po yung laban doon. Ngayon, inuungkat ng mga Black Lives Matter and Antifa. Ang problema,
nakikita niyo po yung buhay ng segregation noon. Kung paano inaapi mga itim na mga Black Americans.
Right.
Ngayon po, walang ganyan.
yes, wala na yun.
That does not happen. No? They can go into any restaurant, they can go into any school, no?
Yes.
And they can do whatever they want as long as they don't
Break the law.
They don't break the law. Siyempre, if you break the law, you have to face the consequences.
Yes.
No?
There's
But they have all the freedoms that they were asking for now.
Yes, because of Martin Luther King. Because of
Yes.
what he did. So, ngayon, ang tanong, bakit yung Black Lives Matter at yung mga Antifa ayaw gawing example si Martin Luther King?
They don't use him
Bakit?
in the whole period that they are rallying against, not even the Democrats, talk about Martin Luther King. And yet, John F. Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy were Democrats.
Yes. So, he came, and then sabi niya, pupunta kami sa Washington. Bakit? So, we will push our advocacy dyan sa Washington. And, it was so famous, it was called the Million Man March.
Yeah.
Million na katao, black, white. Siyempre, predominantly African-American, pero ang daming puti na sumasali. Kasi ang gusto niya, peace. Ang gusto niya, equality. Hindi niya sinasabi, patayin niyo yung mga puti, sirain niyo yung mga business ang ginagawa ngayon ng mga to. So, in that march, he made a speech, one of the most beautiful and most famous speeches in history, I think.
I have a dream.
Yes. And he stood in the Lincoln Monument, facing the Washington Monument. Tapos ang daming nakatao. And we have that clip so we can see what kind of person this is. So this is I Have a Dream speech ni Martin Luther King.
At this time, I have the honor to present to you the moral leader of our nation. I have the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summit of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until that is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But that is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. And they have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulation. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities. Knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friend, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream